If you saw us from across the street, you'd probably think we were the kind of couple who'd last forever. Me and Daniel. I'd be holding the grocery bag with the too long baguette poking out. He'd be carrying our rescue mutt Murphy under one arm like some kind of dad joke cartoon. We'd walk home on Sunday afternoons through the same sleepy neighborhood, waving at the same people, smiling the same way we had since we were 22. Back then, that sameness felt like safety. Now, I'm not so sure what it felt like anymore. Daniel and I met at a volunteer build-a-bench project for a local park. He was sanding wood with sawdust in his hair, wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big, and humming something by the Rolling Stones. I was just the shy administrative assistant who had never used a power drill in her life. He helped me that day, showed me how to hold the sander without losing a finger, made me laugh even though I barely spoke. And he kept showing up after that, with bagels, with secondhand books, with hands that didn't grab but guided. I had never been seen like that before, and it made me feel real. He was solid, warm, simple in a way that was comforting. And for the next 4 years, we built a life that looked a lot like that first park bench. Practical, plain, a little rough around the edges, but solid. But here's the thing no one tells you about safe love. It grows quietly. And sometimes so quietly, you don't realize when it stops growing at all. At 26, I started feeling itchy. Not physically, existentially. I looked at my life. Still working in that same office, still making under $40K a year, still eating at the same 2 takeout places, and asked myself, is this it? Daniel was content. He had his tools, his weekend gigs fixing neighbors' decks, his predictable routines. He loved our little life. And I did too. But I wanted more. I didn't even know what more looked like yet. I just knew I needed to find out. So I signed up for a weekend course in digital design. It was just supposed to be a hobby. Something creative, but then I got good at it. Fast. Soon I was doing logos for friends, then small businesses, then full branding packages for wedding planners and Instagram influencers. I stayed up late studying typography and color theory. I built a portfolio. I opened a freelance account. I made my first $500 in a single week, more than I'd made in overtime for months. And something shifted. Inside me. Not just in the way I worked, but in the way I walked, talked, dressed. I bought new jeans, had my hair colored for the first time since college. I updated my LinkedIn. I started getting invited to design mixers downtown. And slowly, I started imagining a version of myself that didn't fit inside the life Daniel and I had built together. He noticed the changes, but not all at once. At first, he was proud, called me badass designer girl, bragged to his coworkers, said I was going places. But he still came home with grease under his fingernails, and never understood why I cringed when he wore socks with sandals to dinner. He thought success meant stability. I was beginning to think success meant visibility. One night, I came home late from a portfolio review, still buzzing with adrenaline. A senior designer had complimented my use of negative space, and I floated all the way home thinking I might actually be someone now. Daniel had made my favorite, creamy pesto pasta, but the noodles had congealed in the pot. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "You're glowing. You were born for this." I looked at him. Messy hair, calloused hands, shirt with a hole near the shoulder seam, and I smiled back. But in my head I heard something else. If I keep growing, and you don't, how long can we stay side by side before I start walking ahead alone? That night, I stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m., phone screen glowing against the dark. A new notification blinked. "Hey Vanessa, we loved your designs. Want to speak at our Creative Women's panel next month?" I should have felt excited, but all I could feel was that Daniel didn't belong in that room. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. By the time I turned 27, I had over 80,000 followers on Instagram, a full design client roster, and an inbox full of phrases like empowering collaboration and visibility coaching. My face was on a podcast thumbnail next to a woman who had once worked for Vogue. My name had been tagged in tweets by small business owners saying I changed their brand story forever. I was invited to speak at an all-female design panel in a rooftop bar with velvet chairs and gold cutlery. And when I got up there, with the mic in my hand and the skyline behind me, I realized something. I liked this version of me more than the old one. I stood taller. I smiled easier. I no longer apologized before offering my opinion. But with that confidence came a question I didn't know how to answer. What do you do when your wings are growing faster than your partner's feet can follow? Daniel was still the same. Still sweet. Still thoughtful. Still the man who warmed my coffee mug in the mornings and rubbed my feet when I forgot to stretch after long hours at my desk. But now, he also felt small. Like the life we'd built. The inside jokes, the shared playlists, the two-bedroom apartment with mismatched mugs, was something I had outgrown. Not with cruelty, just with speed. He didn't understand why I needed a ring light. He didn't understand why I couldn't just post my work without making it about yourself. He didn't understand that when I walked into a meeting now, people listened, not because of him, not because I was someone's girlfriend, but because I had become someone on my own. I tried to explain gently, "Baby, this is big for me. I'm finally being seen." And he would say, "You were always enough." Which, sweet as it sounded, also missed the point. I didn't want to be enough. I wanted to be exceptional. The worst part? He was never unsupportive. He clapped for me. He brought snacks to my all-nighters. He even learned how to pronounce vector-based responsive graphics just to keep up. But when I'd come home from a gallery launch, heels in hand, brain buzzing from 4 glasses of champagne and 6 new industry contacts, I'd look at him sitting cross-legged in our old sweats watching woodworking tutorials, and think, "You don't belong in this world I'm building." I hated myself for thinking that. But I thought it anyway. Then came Leo, CEO of a small but well-known creative agency. He was sharp, funny, and wore tailored suits like they were skin. We met at a networking event. He said, "I've seen your work. You're electric." I said thank you, and meant it more than I should have. We didn't flirt, we didn't exchange numbers, but the moment lingered, and when I got home that night, Daniel was already asleep, snoring gently with the dog curled at his feet. I looked at them, 2 peaceful creatures, and felt like an intruder in my own story. The real fracture came 2 weeks later. Daniel had cooked dinner, chicken piccata. It was his fancy dish. He was nervous, kept adjusting the napkins, told me, "I thought we could celebrate, you hit 100K today." And I, tired, overstimulated, emotionally absent, took a sip of wine and said, "Do you ever feel like I'm not the same girl you fell in love with?" He blinked, put his fork down. "I know you're not," he said carefully. "But I didn't fall in love with what you do. I fell in love with who you are." I stared at him, and in the most fragile, reckless moment of my life, I said, "But what if who I am now needs more than who you are willing to be?" Silence. He didn't cry, didn't yell. He just looked at me, the way someone looks at the house they built before walking out for the last time, and he whispered, "Then maybe I've been loving a version of you that no longer exists." That night we didn't sleep in the same bed. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like a fraud in my own success story. All this growth, all this becoming, and suddenly I wasn't sure who I had become for. The morning after that conversation felt strangely still. Daniel didn't say anything as he got dressed. No passive-aggressive sighs, no bitter silence. He just kissed Murphy's head, grabbed his toolbox, and left for work without a word. I stood in the kitchen staring at the untouched chicken piccata still on the stove. The parsley garnish he had chopped so carefully was starting to wilt. I should have felt sad, but all I felt was emptiness. Like I dropped something fragile in the dark, and didn't yet know what broke. That night, I didn't text him. He didn't call. We slept in separate rooms, again, and for the next few days it became a new routine. We passed each other like ghosts. The man who once traced hearts into the foggy bathroom mirror while I brushed my teeth now barely met my eyes. But he was still kind, still soft, still showed up. Until the night he didn't. It was a Wednesday. I came home late after a branding shoot with a new luxury skincare client. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. At first, I thought he'd just gone out for drinks, but then I saw it. The framed picture from our first anniversary. Gone. His hoodie missing from the hook near the door. The bottom drawer of the dresser, where he kept his socks and pocket knives, empty. I rushed into the bedroom, heart pounding. On the bed was a folded note, weighted down by the ring box I'd given him last Christmas. Inside was the silver band I had once engraved with the words, "For your hands that always hold me steady." I opened the letter. His handwriting was neat, measured, unshaken. Measured, unshaken. Vanessa, I love you. I probably always will. In some version, some distant corner of my soul that remembers you with muddy boots and messy buns and paint on your cheeks from that DIY coffee table you insisted we could build together. But I've come to understand something. You're not wrong for wanting more. You're not selfish for growing. You're not cruel for realizing you've changed. But I can't stay where I'm no longer enough. And I can't keep offering love to someone who's already decided it belongs to a better version of me. One I was never allowed to become at my own pace. You didn't cheat, you didn't lie, but you made me feel small in the life I helped build. And that's a kind of betrayal no apology can smooth over. Take care of yourself, Daniel. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, knees pressed to my chest, reading the letter over and over. There was no fight, no slammed doors, no you'll regret this, just closure. Polite, final, devastating. The next day, I showed up to a podcast taping and talked about navigating growth while honoring our roots. I used big words, talked about boundaries, power, authenticity. I smiled into the mic like nothing in my world had just shattered. But when I got home that night, to the silence, the empty hooks, the half-used bottle of Daniel's cologne still in the bathroom, the truth hit me. I didn't lose him because I changed. I lost him because I never gave him the chance to change with me. I never asked if he was afraid, never asked what he needed, never even asked if he was okay watching me ascend into a world he wasn't invited to understand. I just left him behind emotionally long before he left me physically. People assume breakups happen because of betrayal, abuse, neglect, but sometimes they happen because you start believing that love can't hold space for ambition, and you confuse stillness for weakness. Daniel wasn't weak, he was still. And in my noise, in my chase, in my thirst for more, I mistook his steadiness for irrelevance. That was the line. The night I said, maybe I need more than who you're willing to be. Because what I really meant, and couldn't admit, was, I've already decided you're not coming with me. And the worst part? He heard me. Not just the words, but the finality in them. And he chose, with all his quiet dignity, to leave before I made him feel smaller than he already did. In the weeks after Daniel left, I didn't cry. I signed new clients, spoke at 3 events, got my first brand collaboration deal with a vegan leather company. My follower count hit 120,000. I started getting DMs from influencers and blue-check artists. Even got featured in a top 30 designers to watch article. The world saw me, maybe for the first time, and I let them. I smiled for every photo, posted curated behind-the-scenes reels, gave interviews with phrases like empowered evolution and knowing your worth. But every night, I came home to an apartment that echoed differently. Same furniture, same dog bowl, less warmth. The couch that used to be our fortress during Sunday night movies now felt like a piece of someone else's home I was borrowing. Murphy, our dog, stopped waiting by the door around 6 p.m. He knew. I started dating again. At first it felt thrilling. There was Leo, of course, the creative director who once called me electric. We went out twice. He was smart, well-dressed, ambitious. But when I told him I still owned a rice cooker that sang a jingle, he looked confused. Why not just use your phone timer? That night, he ghosted me after I said I didn't drink matcha or own a Stanley Cup. Then there was Devin, a soft-spoken copywriter who complimented my smile more than my work. He was sweet, but kept comparing me to his ex who used to model. Said it as a compliment. It wasn't. Another guy, Tanner, tried to pitch me a joint business venture before the appetizers even arrived. The pattern became clear. They didn't want me. They wanted my brand. Meanwhile, my work grew louder. More sponsors, more features, more high heels in hotel lobbies. People clapped when I spoke on panels about creative freedom. Women came up to me crying, saying, "You make me feel like I can be more." And yet, I felt less every day. Because no one knew the version of me that Daniel loved. The version who burned pancakes, who hated public speaking, who once cried in the cereal aisle because we couldn't afford almond milk that month. The version who didn't need to perform. One night, I got home from an event where I'd just been called a visionary. I peeled off the dress, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and cried so hard I thought I might be sick. Because being seen isn't the same as being held. And no one had held me, really held me, since Daniel let go. The next morning I got a message from an old mutual friend. Saw Daniel yesterday. He's working on restoring vintage motorcycles now. Looks good. Happier, I think. I stared at the screen. Happier. Without me. I scrolled through his barely used Instagram out of reflex. He'd posted a photo, a wooden workbench, oil stains, a half-restored 1974 Honda CB360. In the background, a woman, jeans, ponytail, no makeup, laughing. They weren't holding hands, weren't kissing, but there was something in the way she leaned toward him. Ease, familiarity, peace. She looked like the version of me he once loved, the one who didn't need spotlights to feel real. That night, I tried to cook chicken piccata again, his recipe. Parsley and all. It came out dry. I ate it anyway, with the dog curled up under the table and Spotify quietly playing a playlist I hadn't touched since Daniel made it for our 3rd anniversary. First track, You Are the Best Thing, Ray LaMontagne. I laughed. Then I cried. And not the kind of tears I could edit into a poetic TikTok. The ugly, hiccuping kind. The kind you can only cry when you realize you left something not because it was broken, but because you didn't know how to stay still long enough to fix it. It happened in the most ordinary way. A farmer's market. Sunday morning. Sunlight pouring like honey through the gaps in the trees. Local vendors with baskets of peaches, artisan sourdough, lavender soap. I hadn't planned on going. I just needed bread. But as I turned the corner near the honey stall, I saw him. Daniel. In a navy t-shirt. Worn jeans. That same crooked smile he always had when he was concentrating. He was kneeling, helping a little girl tie her sandal, her hair in 2 messy buns, her face lit up with giggles. And next to them was a woman, late 20s. Freckles, linen dress, holding a canvas bag full of tomatoes and sunflowers. She laughed softly, leaned down to say something to the child. Daniel stood up, placed his hand gently on the woman's back. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't forced. It was home. Right there, in a single touch. I froze. Something inside me twisted so suddenly, I nearly dropped the baguette in my hand. I could have turned. I should have. But then, he saw me. And instead of looking surprised or awkward or bitter, he smiled. A soft, sad kind of smile. Then he walked toward me, alone. Hey, Ness, he said, voice calm as a September breeze. Only Daniel ever called me that. No one else could. I swallowed. Hi. He looked different. Not in a dramatic way. Just more anchored somehow. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders broader. His presence, calmer, like time had sanded him down, but not in a way that made him smaller. Just realer. We stood there in silence for a beat too long. How are you? I asked finally. He nodded. Good, really good. I could tell he meant it. And you? He asked. I opened my mouth, closed it, smiled too brightly. I'm everywhere. He chuckled gently. Yeah. I see your stuff all the time. You've built something amazing. I blinked. You still follow me? He shrugged. I never unfollowed. I guess, part of me always hoped you'd find what you were looking for. I didn't know what to say. He glanced toward the woman and child. She's not mine, he said, as if reading my mind. Claire's niece. We take her out sometimes. She's amazing with kids. Claire, I echoed. He nodded. She's quiet. Makes sourdough from scratch, sings off-key, keeps wildflowers in a mason jar on the windowsill. He smiled to himself. She reminds me of who I thought we might have been, before things got loud. That one cut deeper than I expected, but I nodded. She sounds right. She is, he said, without pride or smugness, just truth. We stood in silence again, and I could feel the whole world spinning in that stillness. The people around us kept moving, laughing, sampling cheese. But I was stuck, in the space between what was and what could never be again. Then he said something that will live with me longer than any headline or viral quote ever will. You know, I never needed you to be smaller, Vanessa. I just needed you to believe I could grow too. I stared at him, and for the first time since we split, the dam cracked. Not with tears, but with humility. I'm sorry, I whispered. He smiled again. I know. And just like that, he stepped back, offered a small wave, then turned and walked back to the life I didn't fight to keep. I stood there for a long time, watching him disappear into the crowd, into a Sunday that didn't include me. And for once, I didn't want to run after him, didn't want to rewrite the ending, didn't want to post a cryptic caption about self-worth. I just wanted to feel it, to finally sit with the full weight of the loss. Because Daniel wasn't just the man who loved me, he was the man who saw me, long before I saw myself. The man who believed in the version of me that didn't need filters or stage lights or a verified checkmark to matter. And I let her go, for a spotlight that never loved me back. That night, I turned off my phone for the first time in 6 months. No blue lights, no pings, no curated playlists, no carefully timed posts, just the sound of rain tapping on the window and Murphy breathing softly at my feet. The apartment felt unfamiliar in its silence. Not lonely, just real. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook, the kind Daniel used to leave me sticky notes in. "Don't forget to eat today, Ness." Your smile made my Wednesday. I flipped to the first page, and I wrote, "Daniel, I'm not writing this to ask you to come back. You deserve someone who doesn't have to lose you to see your worth. I just want to say some things, finally, without strategy, without self-defense, without trying to wrap them in shiny lessons. Just truth. The night you left, I told myself I was fine. That I had leveled up. That the future I was building didn't have room for quiet men with oil-stained hands and homemade pasta. I told myself I deserved more. But what I didn't realize was that in chasing more, I lost the most. You never held me back. You were never intimidated. You were never small. I was just too busy measuring you against a checklist I made after I got scared of standing still. You were steady. And I mistook that for stagnation. You didn't have a brand. You didn't scale your voice. You just showed up. Every day. With soft eyes and hard work and the kind of love that doesn't scream, just stays. Until I made it impossible for you to stay. I kept thinking that someday I'd find someone who loved me like you did, and looked like a magazine cover, and talked like a TED Talk, and dressed like a Parisian architect. And maybe I still might. But I don't think anyone will ever love me with the same stillness you gave me. Stillness I didn't know how to sit inside. You believed in the version of me I didn't yet believe in. The messy one. The hopeful one. The girl who cried over fonts and watched sci-fi with pizza on her lap. You held space for her, and I traded her in for a spotlight. The thing about spotlights is, they're warm. But they don't hold you. People think reinvention is always about becoming better. But sometimes it's just about becoming louder. And louder doesn't always mean wiser. Sometimes it just means no one can hear the part of you that's still hurting. I'm building a new life now. One that isn't based on followers or speaking gigs or the next big thing. I'm learning to cook again. My meals are still bad, you'd laugh. I oversalted a soup last week, and Murphy refused to lick the bowl. I've started painting, even if it's just messy watercolor blobs. And sometimes I sit by the window and imagine a world where I didn't flinch at ordinary love. Where I didn't outrun the arms that stayed open even when I was difficult, impatient, impossible. You weren't perfect, but you were present. And I don't think I'll ever find anything more sacred than that. If one day this letter ever finds its way to you, I don't need a response. Just know this. You were never not enough. I just didn't know how to stay still long enough to see what enough looked like. Thank you for loving me without asking me to earn it. And thank you for leaving when I stopped returning it. I see you now. I hope she sees you too. Clearly, fully, and with the same reverence I learned too late to offer. Be well, Vanessa. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope. No address, no stamp, just initials, DH. I tucked it in the back of my bookshelf, next to the copy of The Alchemist Daniel once bought me, the one where he underlined, "When we love, we always strive to become better than we are." And I whispered to the quiet, "I'm still trying." Weeks passed. I still work. Still post. Still move. But not for applause anymore. Now I move toward wholeness, even if it's quiet, unremarkable, invisible. And some days when I see couples in the park, when I smell garlic on the stove, when I hear a Ray LaMontagne song drifting out of a cafe, I smile. Because somewhere, Daniel is living a life I once could have had. And I am finally learning how to live mine, not as a brand, not as a show, but as a woman who finally understands that the deepest love is the one that stays, even after you let it go.